On the Baltic coast of Poland, near the village of Police, is a 450-acre fenced-off area of forest. Smashed concrete structures litter this overgrown site. Skeletal buildings riddled with collapsing walls, underground shelters, and a network of tunnels.
Hidden under the trees in northern Poland is this labyrinth of concrete structures. It's quite clearly something that was industrial. That kind of thing does not happen overnight, and not without a vast investment of time and money.
A group of mangled structures are clustered together at the heart of the forest, flanked by the pulverized remains of tower blocks and a strange brick-colored tower that soars over the trees.
When you look closely, there are clues to tell you exactly what happened there. On the side of one building is marked in German, Khalbunker 4. And then not far away, there's the remains of what was, quite obviously, large storage tanks. And right there, those two elements are at the core of the story. It tells you what happened there.
What was the purpose of this site? What events took place here? And why was it abandoned? In the 1930s, the town of Police was part of Nazi Germany and would play a major role in Adolf Hitler's plans for war. Germany had already been rearming in secret for years when Hitler openly announced his policy of rearmament in 1935. Hitler, however, faced a critical obstacle to building up his military forces.
Very few people know that Germany really lacked the natural resources required to fight a major war. Apart from coal and water, at the time, pretty much everything else was imported. And that critical lack played a huge role in Hitler's preparations for war.
One crippling energy shortage outweighed all others, and that was fuel. Without it, not a single aircraft could fly, ship sail, or tank roll across the battlefield.
The Germans suffered from real constraints in all of their operations from fuel. Through World War II, the prime mover, the main transport, was the M1A1 horse, pulling a wagon.
Germany had almost no fuel and was therefore heavily reliant on imports. In the drive to become self-sufficient, they set out to create their own. The modern equivalent of almost £1 billion was spent on this site, the Police synthetic oil plant. In 1937, construction started on the huge industrial complex. This was no ordinary refinery, but rather a state-of-the-art facility that used a revolutionary new process called hydrogenation to turn Germany's coal into oil.
The Germans use methods to make fuel out of coal that were developed in the early 20th century onto the mid-20th century. They produce beautiful fuels, but they produce fuel that is very, very pure, but mind-bogglingly expensive.
The synthetic fuel is created by liquefying powdered coal. In a reactor, a mixture of heavy oil, hydrogen gas, and a catalyst is heated to almost 400 degrees Celsius and subjected to the incredible pressure of 10,000 pounds per square inch. This dangerous process made Police a lethal environment for its thousands of slave laborers.
The economics of it really don't add up. It's said that it takes 6 tons of coal to produce 1 ton of synthetic oil. And that's before you consider the amount of coal it takes to ship everything around. And whilst for Hitler that may have served a purpose for Nazi Germany, in any other economy, that just won't fly.
After 4 years of construction, Politz finally began fuel production in 1941. At the heart of the plant was the coal mill. Packed around it were numerous storage tanks, distillation plants, pressure chambers, and hundreds of miles of piping, needed to carry the vital fuel to waiting trains and tankers offshore. Politz had gone into production just in time to help fuel the 3,000 tanks and 2,500 aircraft that took part in Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's colossal attack on the Soviet Union. By 1943, the plant was producing a staggering 700,000 tons, 15% of all Germany's fuel.
The synthetic fuel plants kept Germany in the war. That was Germany's only reliable source of fuel, and so they were quite dependent on those plants.
Without that production coming out from Politz, Hitler's war machine would simply grind to a halt.
Whilst pivotal to Hitler's war machine, it came at a terrible cost. 30,000 slave laborers were brought in from across occupied Europe and the Soviet Union to operate the complex and dangerous machinery. Nearly half of these prisoners died from the brutal treatment and toxic working conditions at the plant.
13,000 slave laborers gave their lives at Politz alone, and that's something that should never be forgotten.
As Allied forces gradually gained the upper hand, synthetic fuel from plants like Politz became ever more vital for Hitler's armies.
The Germans are really dependent upon these synthetic fuel plants. And when those plants are attacked, then there will be a huge drop-off in the capability. For example, there is no fuel to train pilots. They're producing airplanes, but there's no fuel, and it will become progressively worse.
The critical weakness of synthetic oil was now exposed. It relied on coal to make it, but coal was desperately needed by other industries, power stations, and even the trains and ships that were taking the oil away from Politz itself. There simply wasn't enough fuel to go around.
The German war effort has got to expend a lot more resource on burning 1 liter of high-test aviation gas than the British or the Americans or the Russians. The Germans are fighting a much more expensive war because they haven't got key resources.
By late 1944, Politz was within reach of Allied bomber fleets operating from Britain and Italy. And in January 1945, they unleashed a devastating 14-minute air raid. More than 1,600 bombs pulverized the plant. This hammer blow mortally wounded the German war machine.
Once the campaign gets going, you see a dramatic drop in German oil reserves and in the supplies available for the German army, and this impacts the German operational effectiveness quite severely.
By February 1945, the Red Army was closing in. The chemists and engineers running operations fled west for safety. And after the war, the Soviet Union looted the remaining equipment, leaving the ruins of Politz abandoned. Today, the remains of this once high-tech refinery are accessible and can be explored with care. They are a forgotten monument to oil production, the Achilles heel of Hitler's Third Reich.
The Allies pulled out all the stops to try and bring production to an end. And if you visit Politz today, there's evidence of that everywhere. Huge craters in the ground, roofs, all these buildings destroyed, some buildings completely turned over. The devastation there was phenomenal because it was so important for the Allies. That was their means of bringing Nazi Germany to an end.
Pulitz reminds us of the horror of death. It reminds us of mass enslavement under cover of war. And it reminds us of the Nazi idea that cruelty and enslavement could create fuel where there was none.